Section 1 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kristina Vavrikova. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers by James McCosh. Introduction, Part 1, Section 1. Definition of psychology, method of investigation. Psychology is the science of the soul. The word is from psyche, soul, and logos, speech or reason. By soul is meant that self of which everyone is conscious. Science is systematized knowledge, and when we arrange the knowledge which we can acquire of the soul, we have the science of psychology. In constructing it, we proceed on the method of induction. This is distinguished from deduction, in which, as for example in mathematics, we proceed from assumed or admitted principles to truths derived from them. In induction, we gather in induco facts, but always with a view of discovering an order among them and arranging them. It is found that in all nature physical and mental facts proceed uniformly or regularly, that is, according to laws. This is the case in physics. Matter attracts matter inversely according to the square of the distance. It is also so in psychology. Like tends to recall like. It thus comes to be the end of science to discover laws. Psychology may be more fully defined as that science which inquires into the operations of the conscious self with the view of discovering laws. Induction begins with observation. In botany, we collect plants and look at their forms and habits. In psychology, we notice mind as it operates and mark its various states. In induction, we also employ experiment, which is a mode of observation in which we artificially place the agents of nature in new circumstances that we may perceive their action more distinctly. Thus, in order to determine whether all bodies fall to the ground at the same time, we put a guinea and a feather in the exhausted receiver of an air pump, that we may note the time they take to descend, independent of the resistance of the air. In like matter, in studying the human mind, we place objects before it that we may find how it is affected by them. Thus, in order to determine how the conscience acts, we direct it to a cruel or a beneficent act, and how the emotions are raised, we call up objects fitted to gravity or disappoint our springs of action. Both in physical and in psychical science, we begin and proceed throughout by observation proper and experiment. But there is a difference in the agent instrument of observation in the two departments. In the former, we employ the senses, such as sight and touch, aided by such instruments as the telescope, microscope, and blowpipe, and we weigh and measure the bodies. In psychology, we make our observations by self-consciousness, which is the power by which we take cognizance of self as acting, say as thinking or feeling, as remembering the past or anticipating the future, as loving, fearing, resolving. Self-consciousness may give us information directly or indirectly. First, we may notice the states of the soul as they flow on, our judgments and our fancies, our joys and our griefs. Second, by a brief memory, we may throw back our mind on the past and recall what has been under the consciousness in a given time, say during the past hour when we were earnestly thinking, or under deep sorrow, or cherishing ardent hope. Third, we may gather what has passed through the minds of other people from their words or their deeds. As we listen to them, as we read their writings, say biographies or histories, poems or novels, or as we observe their conduct in ordinary or in trying circumstances. We understand these are because of our own conscious experience. Our field of view is thus enlarged indefinitely and becomes as wide and varied as our intercourse with mankind and our reading. It is proper to add that light may be thrown on the operations of the mind by the physiology of the brain and nerves. We know objects external to the mind by the senses, and it is important that we know how the senses work. We are not to suppose that the brain and nerves think, but still the rise and even the nature of certain mental affections depend much on these, and light may be thrown on the action of the conscious soul by a careful study of the parts of the body most intimately connected with the action of the mind. Observation in psychology is to be conducted mainly by self-consciousness, but may be aided by the physiology of the cerebrospinal mass. Beginning with the observations of states or affections of mind, we then note their resemblances, differences, and other relations, and can thus coordinate them, place under one head those that are like, and give them a name by which we can speak of them. Thus we find that in certain exercises we notice the external objects before us and we give to them the common name of sense perception, that in others we recall the past and this we call memory, or we picture unreal objects such as a mermaid and this we designate imagination, or we infer from what is given or allowed something else implied in it, and this is said to be reasoning, or we distinguish between good and evil, and this we speak of as conscience, or we are affected with sadness, which is emotion, or we resolve to do a certain act, which is will. According to this view, psychology should have as its province the operations of the conscious self, leaving to physiology the structure of the organism. These two, the soul and the organism, have mutual connections, and the sciences which deal with them may throw light on each other, but all the while they are to be carefully distinguished. All parts of the organism fall under the science of physiology and not psychology. But were it only to enable us to distinguish between physical and psychical action, it is necessary to look at certain actions of the nervous system most intimately connected with mental action. All along the spinal column there is automatic action, which is reflex. There is a cell called a ganglion, into which one nerve enters and from which another goes out. On the former, being stimulated at the extremity, an action passes along to the center, and then motion proceeds along the latter. We have an example in the frog's leg moving when it is pricked. Here there is neither sensation nor volition. No sensation is felt till the action goes up to the brain. The central mass of the brain consists of basal ganglia, the optic thalami and corpora sterata, as in Fig. 2, from which commissures of white fibers radiate to the gray cortical matter. The gray matter, which is at the surface, is cellular and is most intimately connected with mental action. The white matter is in the deeper parts and consists of masses of fibers running in different directions, which are supposed to be mainly transmissive. The communication from the spinal cord is up by the medulla oblongata, Fig. 1 and Fig. 2L, and the crura cerebri to the corpora sterata and optic thalami. And in all the higher animals there is a large transverse bridge called corpus callosum, which connects both sides of the brain. The nerves which carry the connection to the brain are called afferent. Those which carry out the action from the brain are efferent. The former are sensor, the latter motor. The former are denoted by PS, the latter by AM, as the former are posterior and the others anterior in the human frame. There is also a sensorimotor system, of which sneezing is an exercise in which there is sensation and motion but no volition. The action along the nerves occupies a time which has been measured with approximate accuracy. Thus, the action to the brain travels at the rate of 140 or 150 feet in the second. The action from the brain travels about 100 feet in the second. The rate is slowest in sight, next slowest in hearing, and quickest in touch. Section 2. Proof of the existence of mind. But it is asked, what evidence have we of the existence of the soul? The answer is that we know its existence intuitively by looking in upon it as it is acting. We are conscious of it as perceiving, imagining, thinking, resolving, hoping, fearing, loving. We have thus evidence primary and not merely secondary, original and not derived, as certain as we have for matter. But then it is asserted that mind is not different from matter, that it is not a mere modification of matter. It can be shown in opposition, first, that we know the two by different organs. We know matter by sense perception, we know mind by self-consciousness. We cannot, by the senses, observe any pure psychical act. We can touch our own body or our neighbor's, but we cannot touch our own soul or his. We can see a colored surface, but we cannot see a thought. We can taste food, but not an affection of love or of fear. We can hear a sound, but not a reproach of conscience. We can smell a rose, but not a feeling of beauty. Secondly, we know mind and matter as possessing different properties. We know matter is exerted, that is, as occupying space and being contained in space. We further know body as resisting our energy and acting on other bodies. We know mind, on the other hand, as apprehending, judging, reasoning, distinguishing between right and wrong, as under emotion, as wishing and resolving. It is acknowledged that we know things only by their properties, and we know mind and matter to be different by their manifesting different properties. It is a favorite position of some in the present day that the two are correlates of one another, that they are two sides or aspects of one and the same thing. But can we attach any meaning to what we say when we describe thought as a side or aspect of a stone, or of an acid or a piece of timber? Just as little can we understand or conceive that our musings, our fancies, our resolutions should have solidarity, durability, elasticity, hardness, softness, porosity, pressure, gravity. We thus know them as different things, and should so investigate them and seek to determine the properties of each. We may afterwards inquire into the points of connection. Section 3. Cautions to be attended to in the study of the mind. First, certain ideas must be left behind. We must not take materialistic conceptions with us into psychology. In the natural history of the mind, things without us are noticed before the things within us. We are in consequence exposed to the temptation in beginning in youth or mature age the discussion of physical questions. We apply ideas got from matter to mind. We need to guard against this. Thus, we are not to allow ourselves to look in mind itself or any of its operations as occupying space, as extended or as having figure, as having weight or levity, height or depth, elevation or depression, attraction or repulsion, solidity or elasticity, motion or rest, light or darkness, warmth or frigidity. We have come to an entirely new country, and we must learn to accommodate ourselves to the people, to their laws and customs, and in particular, we have to learn their language. Second, we have to beware of the misleading influence of language derived from material objects. As the individual looks without, before he pays special regard to the mind, so in the nature history of society there is an acquaintance with physical nature before there is a study of our mental nature, and our first language is sensible rather than spiritual. So when philosophers begin to study the human mind, they have either to coin and employ a new language, which is very irksome, or they have to adopt the old phrases expressive of external and extended objects. But the old idea is apt to come in covertly with old phrase as we use it. Thus, the original meaning of idea, signifying image, first turned to a philosophic purpose by Plato, is apt to come into our minds, as it does in Locke's philosophy, with the phrase as applied even to a mental concept or notion. The terms employed in various languages to denote the mind, psyche in Greek, anima, spiritus in Latin, ruah in Hebrew, and atman in Sanskrit, originally signified breath or wind. Feeling, at first signifying an affection of touch, now signifies an emotion such as hope and fear. Emotion is literally a moving out. Impression, a fatal word introduced formally into philosophy by Hume, denotes a mark left on a soft substance by a hard. Understanding, now denoting the intellect, refers to something standing under. Apprehension and conception, applied to mental acts in which we lay hold of or bring things together, meant at first a seizing by the hand. We cannot afford, even at the present advanced stage of inquiry, to lay aside such phrases, but when we use them, we must strip them of their materialistic associations. End of section 1.